Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee and here with me is Milly.
Hi.
We have Sophie.
Hey.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Mr. Konkle. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here among fellow Scooby fans.
Thank you so much. So, of course, you wrote some episodes of Be Cool Scooby Doo, I guess notably for this Christmas special that we're doing, Scroogey Doo. But I'd like to go back towards the start of your career and kind of build a picture about your whole entire career up until that episode and beyond. So, just for looking at IMDb, I can say that you've been an actor, director, and writer. But prior to your career, was it your idea to do all three of those, or did one kind of lead to another?
I think I always knew I wanted to do it. I didn't live in LA originally, but I remember being about 10 years old and I went to see Star Wars, I think. And I'm driving home and I was really quiet, and I'm an only child, so my parents were kind of looking over at me like, oh, he's being very quiet. And I was like, I need to leave. I don't belong here. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm leaving. I'm going to LA. I have to try. And they're like, you're 10. Yeah, I know, but I'm leaving, just to let you know. And they're like, what are you going to do with us? I'm like, I'll put you in the home. I don't know what I need. So you can imagine this little 10-year-old Tom saying that. And sure enough, I started playing with all this. I loved doing sketch. I love doing sketch characters. Of course, I got into it through, Monty Python, all the usual suspects. And I absolutely love doing it. And that's really telling a story in a very short form where you have to introduce all the characters very quickly. You have your premise, you do it, but you get to be all these different fantastic characters and scenarios. I knew I wanted to do that, but I also realized the power of film. So I live in two worlds. As an actor, I got into the idea of creating characters and performing, but the other side of me, the writer director side of me, I used that I knew I would show up as an actor, so I started making my own films and doing things, and I started really enjoying working with other actors. And by the time I moved to LA, I'd already done several films, one of which was very gratefully, I won an award, and I had to fly back from LA to accept the award for the film because I had just moved out here. And so I've always had both feet, one here in sort of acting, one in writing and directing. And as it evolved, those passions kind of all mixed together, and I found a comfortable balance. I never wanted to be some superstar, actor. I just wanted to be a jobbing actor working and creating characters, and I was lucky to be able to find that. And then I gave myself permission to start making films and work with people, and I started meeting my heroes. I did a two-man sketch show for on television called The Art of Football with John Cleese, so I got to meet one of my heroes, work with Michael Palin on his travel stuff, and work with Christopher Guest and all these great people that I learned from and incorporated into my own sort of disciplines. And you're always learning. No work is ever finished, it's only abandoned. So I really feel like what's led me to doing Scooby is all those various disciplines and passions and all the people I've been lucky enough to work with. That was just another place that I could put it, where it was like, oh, what a great comfortable structure that you can then take your comic influences and take my weird sense of humor and drop it in. And that's how I ended up there.
It's amazing to hear from such a young age. Like you say, the first time you were kind of in the cinema, really, you knew what it is that you wanted to do. And one of the earliest credits we could find for you was a voiceover role in 1983's Project A. So do you remember how you first, how that project came about and you first got into things?
Yeah, I very early on, there was one agent where I was. It wasn't a very Hollywoody place. And I did a commercial, oddly enough, as a John Cleese sound-alike. And I did a commercial for mattresses and got an agent. And so then they're like, oh, you do voices, you do accents, you do characters, because that's one of the things I do. I have a voice agent and I play all these different characters. And they're like, how do you feel about doing an Asian martial arts film? I was like, I'm in. Of course I want to do it. So I got to meet Jackie because he started dubbing his own stuff. As he learned English more and more, he was like, I feel like I can bring something to it. So I got to play with him and joke around and do characters. And I think in one of them, as a villain, I ended up beheading myself because I was one character who then ran into another character. And as they were doing it, they're like, oh my God, two of your characters are going to meet and one's going to kill the other one. I was like, I'm in, so it was so much fun. I did maybe 11 of those films. I got to work with Jet Li and Chow Yun-fat and all these different people. And often I would be the comic relief, or, if they had a British officer that was in, because some of them were period pieces set in China, or I got to play with the be the sidekick to the main actor. And that was a lot of fun. And that, again, kind of whetted the appetite to do more and more, because with voiceover, you can literally be anything. And you can create anything. You can be someone who's not your age, who doesn't look like you, is all these different things. And that same discipline maps to Scooby-Doo. You'd be surprised how many characters just that small cast plays, where it's like, oh, I didn't know Fred Welker was also, Jacob Marley, and also this, and also Fred, and also, because when you're voice acting, it allows you to just disappear into something easier than you could on stage. Or if you could see you in a movie, you need makeup, or you'd have to do something to it. But with voice, it's like, I'm that. Okay, now let's go.
Awesome. Were there any actors or voice artists that you looked up to before your career?
I knew of voice acting, and I knew there were, like I was watching Looney Tunes things, and I knew like Mark Hamill doing the Joker. Actually, I have a great Mark Hamill story that relates to Scooby-Doo, if I may. Do you want to hear how?
Yes,
how
that's perfect.
So I had written Area 51 Adjacent. That was in season 1, and that was the first thing I ever wrote. And John Colton Berry, who is a genius as far as having comic sensibilities as a writer, as a sounding board, he's like, Tom, I want to start a writer's room with sketch comedy people like you that can do voices and can write and do all this. I'm in. So Area 51, I lavished a lot of attention on some characters that I thought I was going to be playing, because I was like, oh, I want to play the general in Area 51. So I came up with these intricate sort of scenes and sketch, and it was very Python-esque, where he's interviewing the dog, and he's like, I think the dog checks out, So as the show progressed, Mark Hamill had his eye on being a character in it. And he decided to be the character that I wrote for myself in Area 51. So that was Mark. And I'm like, I have to defer to Luke Skywalker because, Star Wars is why I moved here. So I just thought, what a weird world we live in, that here this 10-year-old boy who said he was leaving to go on an adventure, just like Mark Hamill did as Luke Skywalker, is sitting here. And my first episode of Scooby-Doo, Mark Hamill is playing the character that I wrote, wow. So that you couldn't write that, that's one of those moments where you're like, okay, thank you, universe, and he's so amazingly talented, and he did a great job. He did a better job with it than I would have. But of course, he, being a savvy actor, probably looked at it and was like, wow, there's a lot of really good lines with that character, and you really lavished a lot of attention. I'm going to take that one. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, so that was another great experience through Scooby, is that you can actually say, I wrote something that Mark Hamill's in.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing, because not many people can say that. And of course, Mark Hamill has quite a long history with Scooby-Doo. It's amazing to see how, I guess he's the type of person that has done on-screen things and also voiceover things as well. And I guess similarly in your case, we saw on IMDb that you'd had some roles in like iconic shows such as The Office and Community. Yep. Like, what were those experiences like?
Well, it was amazing. With The Office, I was a fan, of the BBC show, Ricky's show, to begin with, and I knew the scripts. And I actually got to audition for the main role in that. They brought in people, and I had a big background. I had just done a FedEx commercial with Steve Carell, as a matter of fact, and Steve was ready to quit the business. He was done. Like he was getting nowhere. We were doing this thing, we were talking. And I think it was Allison Jones, I'm not sure who the casting guy, I think it was her, was bringing in people. And my friend Mike Neal shared a book publishing with Ricky's company as well. So I got a recommendation. to go in and do this, because it's like Tom does this, because I do characters like David Brent. Like I did that through the 90s. Half my sketch got, I played a guy who ran a miniature golf course, a fluffer on a film, all these different ones where it's like people that have authority but are complete idiots. So it was completely in my pocket, and I knew the first couple American scripts were literally lifts from the British series, so I already knew it. So I had a tremendous audition, and though I didn't get it, Steve had I think Bruce Almighty came out right around the time he was auditioning, and that helped him, and I didn't have Bruce Almighty coming out, so he got the part. And they remembered me, and so they brought me back to this guest star, and I had so much fun, and everybody was really nice to me, and I got to kind of play. I had a very small part, but we shot a lot of stuff, because you shoot a lot of things in this sort of loosely improvised fashion. There's a tight script, but you get to play, and it was wonderful. And the same with Community. When I used to audition with Joel McHale, he was a dear friend. He used to watch my son when I had to go in. Joel would stay with him, and then I would stay with him, when he needed somebody to watch. And so he remembered, and the casting director was like, "Hey, we've got a part for you to come in there." And at the end of the shoot, Joel's like, "This is my old friend Tom." He gives me a big hug, and it was a great feeling. And those shows, you learn so much. I was on a show called Back to You, and James Burrows was the director. And James Burrows he is old school, from the 1980s. He did Cheers and Friends and he was the guy who started a situation comedy and got it going. Like, he would do the first episode and set the style. He had a dance with many cameras. It was like filming a play sometimes. So I watched him very closely, because the episode I was in, I was lucky he was in it. And I watched how he worked with the actors, how he would massage a script to make it work for the people there, that dance that you do between your fellow actors and the cameras, because he would have it happening with the live audience. And that was quite rare. By the time Back to You was out, most things were shot like The Office, where it's just single camera, there's no audience. But that was old school. So I got a glimpse of what it would have been like, to be in those old classic sitcoms where you had an audience out there and they would laugh and all that. And so I learned from everyone, and all of those experiences just become part of you. It's what you put in is what you get out. And so every time I look at it as an opportunity of like, well, God, you're nervous, and you're looking at this person, you're like, am I going to be good enough? Can I go toe to toe with these people? Am I going to be able to do it? But at the end of the day, the really good ones are there for you, and they teach you by example. You see how they work with people, you see how generous they are. That's where I learned that acting is making the other person look good, that writing is 3 stages. It's at first, it's the idea that you have that you get on paper, then it's just the blueprint for the show. It's not the final word, because TV shows and films are a visual medium. It's it's not a script. So many people are precious with their script. It's like, you got to let that go, because the script is just the blueprint. It's not the building. And I learned this by working with great people, everybody. Even John Colton Berry, he saw me in a sketch show, and he loved my writing. He was a huge fan of the stuff that I did. I was a huge fan of his stuff. He and I would sit and break an idea or a story in the room for Scooby, and it would evolve immediately. There were times where he's like, "Hey, can you give me a ride home?" And in the ride home, literally, that's where I was telling him about Murder on the Disorient Express. And that's where we came up with the idea of a nostril transplant. I'm like, what's the stupidest transplant you could possibly have? Oh, having another nostril transplanted. It's like, there's nothing there. So we started laughing about that. So some of the funniest stuff happens in the oddest places, but that creativity of 2 people sitting and laughing, the power is that it then goes out, and you sitting there all the way, can go to England, and you can enjoy the same idea I had driving in my stupid car and, driving home, that just 2 people were laughing about. You can share it with the world. I mean, what a strange job.
Well, it's just so crazy that you've worked with so many legends in comedy, like you were saying, and there's that dynamic where you can talk about things and discuss ideas. And so it almost seems perfect that you would then go on to work on. I think I can confidently say the funniest Scooby show that we've ever seen. It almost seems like everything worked out perfectly. But I guess in terms of before you began to work on Be Cool Scooby Doo, I guess how familiar were you with the other versions of the franchise?
Of course, I grew up with, classic Scooby. I'm old enough that there was still Saturday morning you could watch a show, and all your friends watch the same show. It's not like it is now where it's like everyone's picking the thing that they want to watch, and there isn't the same sort of communal. It's like, well, we got 3 channels, so we probably watch the same thing. So I grew up with the original Scooby, which I laughed about and I loved. And I would love that sometimes they would have these strange guest star things, like suddenly Laurel and Hardy would be, in the episode or something. And it would expose you to something. You're like, who's Laurel and Hardy? I'm going to look that up. But I love those. I saw the evolution of it. For a while, it sort of fell out of favor. Then it came back and it got rejuvenated. And then there were some really great, sort of reimaginings of it, even Mystery Inc. and all this kind of stuff, where it is such a timeless structure and they're lovable characters that you can plant them in almost any situation, and they have such strong voices that half of that's already like, you're like, I'm in. Now what happens with them? Because they all represent aspects of a personality, and them, and you're like, yeah, they would do that. And the fun part about playing with it in Be Cool Scooby Doo is you can take that and you can go, Daphne, today she's going to be obsessed with taking away her senses, and we call them Daphneisms. And we would give her Daphneisms in order to sort of make her character come more alive, because she has so much potential.
That was one of the great things about this series, is everything that it did for Fred, Daphne and Velma, because Shaggy and Scooby, they'd already been developed a lot, but it also shone a light on that the other 3 characters are still there. And to that end, either through watching it growing up or from working on the show itself, did you ever have a favourite member of Mystery Inc.?
Well, with Mystery Inc., I mean, the look of it, I thought was fantastic. I liked the fact that they delved into the relationship that Fred had with the others. I think for me, that was like, yeah, why haven't they talked about that? Like, why haven't they? The thing that I think worked best about that is it put it in one place so that they could really concentrate on the characters and their interrelationship. And it took it to a level that it needed to go to grow, because even if you kind of retract and go in a more comic thing like Be Cool, you've still got the stuff that you learned about them from the other shows in the back of your mind. And I think that feeds it makes it richer, because you're like, I know what was really going on and they were thinking, and I know their relationship, and adding an emotional component was probably my favorite thought about that particular series.
And I guess when you were growing up and watching the cartoon, did you ever have a favorite member of the gang that stood out to you then?
I have to admit, I love Shaggy. As a kid, I loved slapstick. I loved, the absurd. So I grew up with stuff like that. And I would have to say, I loved that they could comment. They were always outside of it and could comment on it. And they were very simple, it's like, well, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and I love that about the character, because they're primal, they're very basic, but lovable. And I think that resonates when you're a child. That really resonates, because when you're a child, you're like, I'm hungry, I want to eat, and you'll do whatever is necessary to get your food. And I think that the innocence between the two of them, they're like a classic old silent comedy team between the two of them. He loves the dog loves him, but the dog's probably smarter than him. So you have that great dynamic. So yeah, that for me, that's a childhood memory. I love how they made me feel.
It's a fantastic character, and as you were saying, you enjoyed it growing up, as you did with Star Wars, and then again, moving down the line, it's then something you find yourself working on. So I mean, in regards to beginning work on Be Cool Scooby Doo, how did that come about?
Well, I was really lucky. You put things out there and you never know where they're going to land. I did live sketch shows for almost 15 years. And I had done a show. It was a double act with a guy named Dave Beeler, and I wrote an original thing, and it was actually a sequel a little bit to Peter Cook and Dudley Moore's show. They had a show called Good Evening, and I wrote a show called Good Night. And it was a two-hander sketch show between the two of us. And I think John saw it. And I wrote this one sketch about a mime who had some family tragedy, and now he was struck talking instead of struck dumb. He could not stop talking. So he's like, I'm walking against the wind and doing all that. And John just thought that was the funniest thing ever. Because I had the mime die in an airbox of his own construction. He suffocated in the airbox. And John's like, you are wonderfully absurd. And we found out we had a lot of the same influences. And he got a gig developing, basically the mandate was, can you make Scooby Doo a comedy, a funny show, a more irreverent show? Can we try it? You know, let's see what we can do with it. And John's like, I know exactly what we can do with it. So very early on, he called me and he's like, I'm over at Warner Brothers. Can you come over? And I lived very close. So I went over and they kind of showed me, they're like, we're thinking about this as a design, and oh, there's this guy and everything, and here's some empty offices and things like that. And I was like, empty offices? Oh, interesting. He's like, I want to build a writer's room, and I want you to be the first person. And I was like, I would love to. I'm a huge fan of John's work. You know, he did Phineas and Ferb stuff, and I had seen him, I think it was called Playthings, was his sketch show, and I thought it was brilliant. And I was like, let me think. Yes. And so we started talking, and the way that it came about was he really lobbied for someone like me to do it, because they were, you know, obviously a little scared to have this sort of Monty Python-esque sketch guy who'd done, you know, completely different things from this to do it. But to their credit, or ignorance, Warner Brothers said, yeah, okay, have him be the staff writer. So John and I started to become part of a team. And, you know, he wrote like crazy as well. He had very definite ideas. We used to have a whiteboard, and we would break the stories up there and all the places where it was going. And he started bringing in all the elements that he was interested in, and I would suggest things. And we did what we call breaking stories, breaking episodes. And so we would pitch. And I pitched Area 51 adjacent as my person. He's like, what? And I'm like, well, everyone knows about Area 51, but what about Area 53 or the ones right next to it? Because the running joke here is, if you're looking for an apartment in LA, the way they'll fool you into getting an apartment in a really crappy area is they'll say, oh, it's Studio City adjacent, you know, and you think, oh, Studio City, that's really safe. And you'll go, and it'll be like in a demilitarized zone, very near, adjacent to Studio City. And they'll be like, well, it's a Studio City adjacent apartment. And you'll be like, oh, that's why it's only $1,000 for one room. So the joke being Area 51 adjacent, I started just sort of developing the idea, and from there we had a style. And then season 1 went really smoothly. He brought in some amazingly talented friends that he was fans of, and I got to be friends with them as well. And for a little while there, we had the idea of having a room where anything goes, and you were safe to come up with absurd ideas. One thing that ended up happening is it was so much work that, you know, John had to work a little bit on isolation. I ended up having an office there, but I would sit and work on my things. And we never got to cross-pollinate as much as we wanted to. I think if Be Cool Scooby Doo had continued, it would have been like those old school shows where you're like, oh my God, look at that writer room. You know, all these different people, all these talented people hanging out, throwing darts at the wall, coming up with ideas and stuff. That was our dream. And I think had it continued, it probably would have worked. But given the pressure cooker that we had to do it, I sat and wrote like crazy. And that's how I ended up getting on the show, was that John believed in me as a sketch writer and as a writer in general. And he went to bat for me.
Well, before we go any further, I just want to say just how much I love Be Cool Scooby Doo. It is definitely one of my
Oh,
favourite
great.
Scooby Doo series. And
That's so great.
I know it got like a lot of hate for it and all, but as a Scooby purist, even I can say that it was just amazing. So I even made the figures for Be Cool Scooby Doo. So
Oh,
that's how
that's
much I love
great.
it.
It means a lot to me to hear that, because yes, the look of it, we didn't decide all of that stuff. Some of that stuff was sort of thrust upon us, and stylistically there was a huge influence from the sort of Seth MacFarlane camp and all of that, and we did the best we could with what they gave us. And something that's really gratifying is through the struggle, with Be Cool, I had written the second season and they waited almost a year to put it out because there was all this confusion about the release, and then it took a year for the second season to come out. They changed the times on it sometimes. I think it's finding its audience now, and the fact that you're the people that I wrote it for, that you're finding it now, is gratifying, because I think when they initially had it, they weren't sure what the rollout was and the time wasn't consistent, and they would put it behind a paywall here or there. And now that it's out in the world, people are finding it. So I love that you love it and you get it. It honors it. At the same time, it can be irreverent and silly and fun, and that's okay. I mean, it doesn't. When I saw some of the hate coming out, I was like, that doesn't mean we don't like it. We live with it 24 hours a day. Of course we like it, And if you can't have a laugh, I don't know. So it's really good to hear that now people are starting to go, you know what, I like that show and I get the humor, and it's an affectionate love letter to Scooby, to be honest.
Well, yeah, the writing's definitely second to none. It's brilliant. Yeah, always makes me laugh.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
I guess focusing more on like the other side of things, like we spoke earlier about your kind of roles doing voiceover, and you voiced the Irish guy and the leprechaun in
Yes.
Giant Problems. So how did that come about? Was it just kind of a situation where you were writing and they wanted you to try out for some voices, or what was the kind of process for voicing those characters?
Well, it was interesting. Because I'm a professional performer, it actually created a problem. Because if you're working as a writer producer on there, you cannot give yourself first permission to also be a voice actor or a player on it. In fact, it's a legal issue. So at first I thought, oh, I'm going to do some voices. And John rightly thought, he's like, oh, you could do some voices, because originally I was going to be the scientist who's doing the nostril transplant and all that stuff. And then Warner Brothers sort of pushed back and said, "Oh, you can't have the person writing it, write all the roles for themselves. That cuts out all the things." So I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." But I didn't write that episode, and so they heard me doing some voices, and like, "I think you should come down." Colette, who's wonderful, she's the casting director on that, met me and gave me an opportunity to do it, because they knew, I mean, that's what I did for a living. But my presence couldn't be felt in too many of those episodes. So I ended up doing that just to have fun and just to do one, because I wasn't the main writer on that episode. There was a loophole on it, and I would have done so much more, but I understood where they were coming from, because I think the danger is you could have someone get in there and be like, and I'm going to be this and this, and I'm writing this for myself and this for myself, and then their casting would be quite limited. So I wish I could have done more voices, but I had fun doing the few that I did. And always I had the actor in mind when I was writing. You could hear the character. Sometimes I call it dictation. It's like you're taking dictation from the character and sitting and writing. It's certainly with Scroogey Doo, a lot of it was taking dictation. Like I heard it and I was getting it down as fast as I could. The initial idea, the pitch, is John and I were laughing. It's like, well, Christmas is coming up. I said, you know what I've always wanted to do? They always stop ghosts and expose them. Wouldn't it be funny if Scrooge, every time he's going to learn some important lesson about life, they step in and go, stop, 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 it's a fake. And so Scrooge learns nothing from life. He learns nothing about being a good person, because they keep stopping the very ghosts that are supposed to be haunting him. And John's like, that's it. So quickly I went back and I read the original text of Christmas Carol, And I already I knew it, from the other TV versions and stuff, but I wanted to look back at the source. And then I thought, God, I can do something with this. So then we started doing it. John and I bounced ideas, and he refined things. If I pushed things too far, he went, come back. You can't do that. That'll scare too many people. And then I thought, you know what? It's a perfect structure. And my sense of humor is very much that sense of humor. And to their credit, they came out with that episode. And it's one I'm really proud of, because it's such a simple idea. It's like Velma learns from the ghost that she questions who she is, and Scrooge learns nothing because they keep stopping the ghosts who are haunting him. It's like, it's a perfect symmetry, and you're always looking for that kind of symmetry in the story. So that's how that kind of evolved.
It is so hilarious because with how funny Be Cool Scooby Doo is, it almost plays like a live action comedy, in that you can imagine the actual characters being there on the screen, bouncing off each other's jokes and each other's banter. And so I guess a bit of behind the scenes information, maybe kind of as it was with your characters, or I guess the whole cast in general, was that the type of show where it would all be recorded together in the same soundstage, or did everyone record separately?
Both. The logistical considerations of some of it did not allow people to all be in the same room, but you always heard the other performer's performance. If you could get people in, all the better, that you can bounce off each other. Sometimes though, you had to do it in isolation, particularly if it was a guest star, someone that wasn't available. But overall, you usually had people honing and giggling and laughing at the script together. And Colette, the director who is doing the voice work, would allow for that. And sometimes, with the writer, they'd be like, "This joke, what do you mean by he's afraid of widths instead of heights? Widths? You mean widths this way?" It's like, yeah, he's afraid of that. And they would get clarification on things. And that was beautiful, because sometimes in animation, the writer is not included. And John was included a lot, in the recording sessions and things. And I think that's important, because that gets the original idea, the original voice and the comedy closer to the performers who have to do it, with less intermediary, you know what I mean? Like less people interpreting it and going, well, I think this is what they meant. It's like, we were lucky enough that often there was a, what did you mean? And they could ask you, and that's not as common as you would think in animation, because sometimes they're separate. You'll write it, it goes off somewhere, they animate it and they record it, and you never hear back until you see the finished thing. But I think it's always better when you can play with the actors, and the actors can ask things, or you can top jokes and make them better, and they can bounce off each other. So yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of byplay and a lot of communication, which made Be Cool special.
It certainly sounds like it was a great environment for everyone to work in, and the fun certainly, translated through that very well. And I know you were saying kind of often when you were writing, you already had, the voices of people in mind, but we have spoken about some of the roles that, you would like to have voiced. Is there any that really stands out to you as parts that you were writing and you were almost hearing your own voice as you were writing them?
My God, yes. Tons. The general, in Area 51, in Scroogey Doo, I really had my eye on Jacob Marley. I had my eye on Scrooge. Dr. Bugley was one of my favorites. See, I love silly names, so I came up with as many silly names in that episode as I possibly could, and they would cut out ones they didn't like. But yeah, I had my eye on a lot of those. When I was doing the Disorient Express episode, not only was the doctor really on my mind, but also the conductor and a couple other things. And I think that helped the writing, because there was this poor guy who, I think he was an animator, or he was working on something, but they assigned him to a desk next to me for a couple of days. And I was like, can I do this show for you? And he's like, sure. So he's sitting there, and I'm reading the entire, Scroogey Doo thing to him, and he's laughing, and I'm playing all the parts. And it was a great way to just try someone who knew nothing about the new show, but he was like, that was really good. Like, that's what we're doing? That's the show? And I'm like, yeah, that's it. And we had a great laugh because I got to perform every single part and see how it worked. So yeah, I had my eye on particular parts, and then others I knew, Frank and Gray and Kate were so good. Vanessa Marshall plays Ms. Whiteblack, the narrator, and I knew her for years before she even did the Star Wars thing. She auditioned to play my wife in a commercial one time. I mean, we've known each other forever. So I was delighted to hear that these people were doing it, and I knew their strengths. Like Matthew as Shaggy, he's been doing it so long, he just knows it inside and out, but he still plays. He still can play with things and still learn and discover new things. And every actor appreciates when something's well written. They're like, thank you, it's good mana I can play. And if you have their back and you give them some good something to really bite into as far as the comedy and the character, they'll do their best.
I think you certainly, throughout all of Be Cool, hear that kind of playfulness in their voice as well, that they have really, that this was something unique for them to start, almost re-enthusing themselves with the characters for a little bit more. And as this is scheduled to go out on Christmas Eve, we're really keen to speak about the Scroogey Doo episode with you. So This one, you were credited as the sole writer. So how did that compare to you compared to a lot of the co-writing that you've done?
It's always fun, even when you're the sole writer. John Colton Berry and I bounce. I mean, nothing's created in a vacuum. And credit to John Colton Berry is amazing. He is the overall guiding force in Be Cool Scooby Doo and the final word in the writing. Something that I like about being a singular voice versus writing with someone is, right or wrong, when you're writing something, you get to at least put it out in that form. You're not making concessions before anyone ever sees it. And I liken that to a play. If you're doing a big movie or something and a lot of money's at stake, you have many considerations and many people you have to defer to, you have to make concessions. But if you're doing a little play, you can put the play up once the way you meant it. Now, it could suck, it could be awful, it could be terrible, but at least it's what you meant, and it's what you wrote, and it's what you wanted to do. And you can learn a lot from that. You learn more from failing than you do from succeeding. And my feeling about writing with a partner is, what I enjoy about it is, particularly in comedy, you're laughing together. You don't tend to watch a television show and laugh as much as when you're with somebody else laughing at something. And so when I'm writing, I love having somebody to write with that gets it. Even if they're not actively writing the actual lines, they're sharing the experience of it being created with you, and they're a sounding board. With Scroogey Doo, I was a bit on my, like I said earlier, they put you in an office and you're sitting there writing, but I still read the thing to the guy next to me, and I like having that sort of autonomy to write, just the idea, like, let me run with this. I've got it. I didn't need to sit every minute with someone and write. So often I like to write something sort of as I intend, and then partner with somebody, have them sort of tell me, well, you made that too easy and you wanted this to happen, or that doesn't make sense. And in my brain, so I'm sort of trying to make it make sense, but sometimes those things like, oh, that's not clear to someone because I see it, they may not see what I meant. So with something like Scroogey Doo, I'm really honored that to have the sole credit on it. But at the end of the day, everybody contributed to it, right down to performance. And that's one I'm really proud of. And I'm still playing with the idea of Scrooge. Like, from this idea, I wrote a podcast of a even more absurd Scrooge show called The Festivus Incident. That I'm still playing with those same themes because there's something about the story I just love, and it makes me smile. And I got much sillier in that than I could have with Scroogey Doo. And Scroogey Doo, I'm super happy with the way that it turned out. I think it's one of the better episodes that they put out.
Well, keeping with the Christmas Carol, more recently you wrote and performed The Haunting of Ebenezer Scrooge. Yes. To this end, would you say that the Christmas Carol story is one that particularly resonated with you?
Yes, I do, because it's so many different things. It's a horror story, you know, it's a redemption story. It still applies, you know, even looking at sort of the Victorian age, where the class system was very there was a lot of stratification, you know, there's the haves and have nots. The lesson of that is so universal, where it's like, well, just be nice to people, have empathy with other people, don't make money, you know, the only thing that's of value to you, to realize that your life is the sum total of other experiences, and how you make someone else's life better was such a great lesson from Dickens, that framework is so familiar that it allows someone who does comedy like me to just play with it. You know, the Haunting of Ebenezer Scrooge, the Festivus incident, was much more of my sort of goon show Python-esque take on it. But at the end of the day, you'll notice, I don't know, have you had a chance to listen to it at all?
I have, yes, it's
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, you'll notice that there's real stuff in there where they're like, don't treat employees like liabilities,
Yeah.
but treat them like assets, you know. And the guy goes, well, what do you want? Some sort of healthcare program? And it's ridiculous, you know. And you can still talk about all of that stuff, and get to the real things comedically. You can tell the truth. And you can be silly and absurd, which is my main point. I just want to make people laugh and create silly situations. Like at the beginning of it, the whole idea was that somehow Scrooge was fascinated that Jacob Marley was haunting him in the off hours. It's like, are you getting paid to do this? You know, so it started with that. And I think that story, A Christmas Carol, resonates with almost all the cultures, because at the end of the day, we all know someone like that, who you're like, look, if you just took the blinders off in your life and you realize, you know, you're seeing the world like this, like what you expect, you're negative. And so your negativity is bringing it back and reinforcing this negative view you have of the world. And that's how someone becomes this miser, this isolated person who, you know, it's the ghosts show him. It's like, you died and the world's better for it, you know. And so for me, I was like, that's a great simple structure to do. And one of the most interesting challenges I had is someone, having seen Scroogey Doo and that, asked me on an app called Clubhouse. It's a thing where you can call in and do it's like a party line, but hundreds of people can listen to it. They're like, would you do a straight version, a real version of Scrooge, and you play Scrooge live on that? So I ended up playing Scrooge in a serious version live on Clubhouse. You can still find it. I think it's on there if you search Christmas Carol. That's me as Scrooge. But having done the comic versions first, I actually think it made the dramatic one way more moving, because I got him. I got the inherent sadness of it and the inherent absurdity of this old man being visited by ghosts from his past, his present, and his future, and waking up and having that realization. I think it made me a better performer, having written silly versions of it.
Wow, that is just incredible. And just going back to the Haunting of Ebenezer, it was funny because, like, just listening to this, it's kind of like you see where things begin to add up as well. Like I think you said that you wanted to play the role of Marley, and I think you actually do end up playing that in
I
the
do.
podcast
You
series,
bet
so
I
that's
did.
just absolutely incredible.
Yeah. No, I really like how boisterous and big he was. He's like, you stupid idiot. You know, so I I ended up finally doing it. And that's really, you know, a lot of people, artists or writers and things, they end up sort of mining the same themes and trying to hone it and do better and better versions of things. And so you start to look for patterns, and it's like that it's a fascination for me. I think that's why there's 3 different, you know, iterations of this. And I was lucky that Scroogey Doo could happen, because what a great place to put it with those amazing characters. And you can watch it in a Scooby episode, but it's all those funny ideas. It has a place, you know. It's not just a bunch of sketches. It's an actual episode of Scooby Doo, you know, which was so much fun to do. And kudos to them letting us take a chance with that.
It definitely did pay off. It's definitely one of our favorite episodes, and I think the whole thing just came together so well. And it's funny
Yes.
because just talking about the voice of you writing and everything is like we did speak to Neil Ross recently, who did eventually go on to play Scrooge.
That's
So
right.
at the point of you writing, at what point do you know who gets cast in certain roles, or like how does that process work?
After they do a read through, of course the principals already have that. Then they start divvying up like, Gray, you can be Daphne and the Ghost of Christmas Past, and you're like, oh, that's kind of fun, I hadn't thought of that. Do this, and so they start divvying it up when they do the read through. There's usually a thing called a table read. You usually get a chance to go through the whole script that way and hear it once. Sometimes they don't have that luxury. Sometimes they go straight into record and they're like, we need you to do the voice of Christmas Yet to Come. Can you do that? So it'll be that spontaneous. And someone real talented, like Neil, I mean, he'd be the symposium voice. He's the voice of the symposium head that Velma is presenting her theories with. So he'd do Scrooge and that could be a very last minute thing. It's like, hey, can you pick that one up? And a great actor like that goes, I've got a voice for it. I've got a character. Let's do it. So it can happen all through the whole creation of it, from the very first time they're hearing it to last minute. Yeah, we need somebody to do that. So can you do that voice as well? And in the moment they'll come up with it. And sometimes that's the best thing.
Absolutely. And like Millie was saying before, like we do intend to premiere this interview on Christmas Eve. So I do kind of want to touch upon the concept of Christmas, because I think Be Cool Scooby Doo is like the record holder for Scooby shows for the number of winter episodes and Christmas episodes. And so in your opinion, what do you feel makes, I guess, Christmas time lend itself well to Scooby in general?
It does. And let's face it, I think the reason there are Christmas episodes of things because it echoes our own lives. If Christmas didn't exist, we would still need it because we all need a pause where we just know, okay, I'm going to get some vacation. I get to like get quiet, hopefully, for a little while. But there needs to be some markers in your year. Otherwise, it becomes just a blur of nothing. And I think the idea of Christmas, for whatever someone is doing to celebrate it or to have a holiday in general, is a human need. It's a human thing. If you don't get a break, if you don't go, you know what, I'm going to sit for a minute and what did I do this year? And what am I thankful for? Or it feels good to buy something for someone and go, you know what, I appreciate you. Here's a little trinket, here's a little thing that you probably don't want, but I bought this for you. Here's this useless thing. And by doing that, you think for a moment, this is a marker to my life. This is a pause. In Scooby, those episodes were a mark in the season of Scooby. You would pause for a minute and say, well, there's this sort of communal event. There's this thing that's about gratitude, that's about having some peace of mind or marking the passing of the year. Let's make that part of the Scooby experience. Let's have a Christmas episode to celebrate the characters, but also in our own lives, it's like we need a break. We need something. And those Christmas tales can be this sort of little morality play, or it can be just for fun, or it can be just a pause in the storytelling where you're like, okay, we're going to have fun with it this way, or we're going to have something that's got a little heart in it, or it's got a little lesson in it, or it's got a moment where the gratitude of the characters and what the original spirit of Christmas is, which is one of thankfulness and hopefully a pause and just acknowledging your existence in the sort of day-to-day craziness. You can at least say, hey, I got a holiday coming up. I can relax for a couple of days. And that's really what Christmas episodes do, is they acknowledge in the lives of the characters, in the Scooby characters, they also have that. They have something special. There's the Christmas episodes are a marker in the lives of those characters. And sometimes they learn something, sometimes it's funny, but at the end of the day, it's special. And I'm glad there are so many Christmas episodes.
We are too. And I think, like you say, it's a very important time of the year. And as well, you were talking about the Christmas Carol. I think it lends itself so well to different adaptations because there is so much that can be done with it. Like you're saying, there's ghosts, it can be kind of a spooky aspect. At the same time, it can be a comedy. There's also moments in there where it is that kind of reflective awakening that's an important aspect of that time of year. I mean,
Yes.
you know, like we say, with there been so many, you know, winter episodes in Be Cool, I mean, what would you say is kind of the most kind of fundamental aspect of a holiday special, or something that you most enjoy about Christmas episodes in general?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know what? I just saw the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I really liked it. And it found the essence. The point of a Christmas special, or what I like about them, in my opinion, and having watched that, is it gives a magical quality to the dynamics of whatever world the story is taking place in. All of a sudden, it's okay to be reflective. It's okay to take pause. And in a Christmas special or a winter special like that, it allows for the magical quality of you get to love something new about a character, or they discover something about themselves. And the fact that it's set in that atmosphere, the specialness of a Christmas, or just the sort of things aren't quite the same, you know, the decorations or this or the time of year, it allows for a kind of special magical moment. And people like a Christmas special because it's a communal acknowledgement of, we're not just animals, you know, living every day, waking up, we eat, we go to work, we go to sleep. It's like, no, there's this little special thing that we all have where we're like, oh, this is the special Christmas episode. Just like in your life, hopefully you take a special moment and you go, end of the year, I'm going to have my own special bath, and I'm going to sleep late, and I'm going to do nothing, because that's your Christmas special, you know, and it's a break from the mundane.
I think I'd completely agree with you though about the Guardians Christmas special. We absolutely loved it, and I think for somebody like you were saying who appreciates humor the way you do, that song that they did at the start where it almost kind of was exploring how Christmas could look from the outset to people that have never celebrated.
That's great. I was so jealous. I was so jealous of the writing in that episode. I'm like, why didn't I? You know, I ran into James Gunn. We were both nominated for something for a web series award in like 2009, I think it was. So I crossed him on stage and we talked, and I know his brother actually was with the same agent I am. Sean Gunn, and his writing was great. It had a lot of heart. I love the absurdity of just, I'm going to give someone Christmas, Kevin Bacon for Christmas. That's what a good Christmas special does. I mean, that's a very Be Cool Scooby Doo type episode, where it's just this absurd idea of, I'm going to give Kevin Bacon to cheer him up, and then they just run with it, and all the illogical dead ends that you can go to. And at the end of the day, it still had heart. It had that great song, you know, and Scooby has songs too. And I felt like the thing that really worked about that is they meant it. Like there was actually heart in it. It wasn't cynical. It guarded itself. Those characters guard themselves against how bitter and awful the world can be, or how they're outcast. But at the end of the day, they're fluffy little lovable characters inside, and they're worth spending time with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it certainly is quite relatable back to Scooby, like you're saying, the great music, the lovable characters and everything. And honestly, we're really looking forward to not just reflecting on this year, but everything that the future holds as well. And to that end, we'd love to know, is there any upcoming projects that you have that you can share, or anything like that?
Yeah, I have a couple things. I'm working on 2 movies at the moment. I have one called Test Drive, which is a very funny thriller set in a car. I'm working on another film called Island in the Stars, which is an adventure film, like a science fiction adventure film that I would film in Australia, which will be a lot of fun. And then I have some more. I have a thing called the Mindstream Players, and we do these podcasts, these things. We have 2. One is we're going to be recording very soon. That's going to probably come out in January. Which I'll let you know when it comes out. It's going to be everywhere. It'll be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everything, just like the Mindstream stuff is now. And I'm really proud of the writing in it. I think it's going to be very, very funny. So yeah, those 3 things are coming up almost right away. And there's one other thing that I'm working on, which is it's a bit of a parody of like a Steven Spielberg film. It's called Meth Gator. It's about crocodiles that get meth, the drug meth dumped in there, and they become these super crocodiles, and they terrorize a barbecue that's happening in a swamp. It's called Meth Gator, and it's a hilarious sort of horror comedy.
Brilliant, some great stuff there. Where is the best place to keep up to date with your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Tom Konkle. You can look up the Mindstream Players and see my stuff there, or I post stuff all the time on my Facebook, so you can see episodes. In fact, I just posted the Scooby episode on there, and some other stuff, so you can check out what I'm doing. And I do updates and photos and things from the set and things that I might be doing. I'll do on Twitter or on Facebook, so you can find me there, or you can just search Tom Konkle. You'll find stuff.
Well, that is amazing. I'll be sure to leave them linked in the description down below, because I'm sure that
Thank
people will be so interested, especially after this episode. It's just absolutely amazing. Very meta as well, that we dedicated a whole section to talking about Christmas specials in our Christmas special.
Yes, exactly. Your Christmas special about Christmas specials about Christmas specials. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Oh, but thank you so much for the time you've taken to speak to us today. Like we say, especially so close to the holidays, it means a lot that you've given up so much of your time to speak with us today. So thank you so much for being on. It does mean a lot to us.
Thank you. I'm grateful. JayBee, Milly, Sophie, you're fantastic. And I really am grateful. The whole point of doing this nonsense is so that someone enjoys it. So it's nice when you meet someone and they go, hey, I laughed. It was good. I liked it. It means a lot to me. And I really appreciate you all, and I wish you a great new year.
You as
thank
well.
you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
This has been an absolutely incredible time for us, and we do hope that people watching this has taken some positivity away from this as well. And yeah, I guess you can find all of Sophie's links in the description down below, as well as our link tree. If you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a very happy holidays. Thank you so much.